Welcome to Digging Deeper Moments, a ministry of Eagles Nest Church. We hope a few minutes from our studies leads to a better Bible study for you. We are concluding our look at the book of Judges. And by now you've learned that the point of the book are the patterns, the redemption cycle, as well as the downward spiral of the 12 tribes and their warrior judges every time they went around, pass go, collected $200 or 20 to 40 years of God's peace or shalom. But there is one story that doesn't seem to fit the message of the patterns. Or does it? I'm referring to what we typically call the judgeship of Deborah, or Deborah for those that have an Eastern pronunciation. I'm not even going to attempt the original Hebrew that doesn't even include the D and the B. First, the obvious. She is the only female judge recorded. The second is that she's not showing the descent from righteousness to connect the first three judges to the judge found after in Judges 6, Gideon. Gideon is famous for his doubts and his fears, and also the sins of his success, his greed and his pride, and how that then extended into his family. Instead of seeing the steady downward trajectory to Gideon, and then down, down, down again to Samson, we see judge number 4, Deborah, break the pattern as probably the most powerful and closest to God in the whole book. In fact, she is one of only 3 in the Old Testament trusted by God and the tribes with the dual role as judge of God's laws for the people, as well as the prophetic voice of God to the people. Who are the other two? Well, you might have already guessed. Moses, the original lawgiver and uniter of the tribes into a nation, and then following the book of Judges, possibly the author of the book of Judges, Samuel, the great reuniter of all the tribes, the last judge, and the anointer of the monarchy. So why this amazing exception to the pattern with Deborah? Or just a thought, maybe the pattern isn't broken after all. Maybe it's just harder to see because we're reading through lenses of our particular worldview. For example, very early on, rabbis of the highly patriarchal Jewish society put into the Talmud teachings of Scripture that Deborah had to be a step down from her predecessors because, as a woman, she summoned a man, Barak, instead of humbling herself and going to him. Therefore, she showed a spirit of haughtiness. And obviously, God took her prophetic powers from her later in life because of that. I mean, it's been taught that way for so long, we don't question that tradition, right? Or a particular textbook used for a course at a Christian university begins with the intellectual point of view that the supernatural references in Deborah's song, well, they're just metaphorical. Or propaganda used by Deborah to convince the people that God wanted her to consolidate political power and make Israel great again. Having a warrior Barak by her side consolidated the male vote and gave her an army to rule for 40 years. So, also not really as righteous. There you go, solves the problem. Or there's the Bible study podcaster I've listened to for perspective, who applies our current understanding of psychoanalysis and thinks Deborah is a great example of a strong, assertive female in the Bible, with her one fault being that she took advantage of someone with obvious mommy issues. See, we all have our biases. You're about to hear a bit of mine. But if you and I make it our prayer from the start to not read and study his word intentionally from our worldview, but instead go into his word humbly, open it to inform and reform our view of the world, well then, he promises it will do its job to bring us one step closer to his mind and his heart every single time. I encourage you to read Judges 4 and 5 prayerfully before or after this possible explanation, but those of you who have already seen my opening overview of this book know that I think the key is in the fact that Deborah wasn't supposed to be the judge. Well, of course she was. You just said her dual role was prophet and judge. Again, let's not go by our current English lenses of what judge means. You know, the one appointed to decide legal issues between parties, because that's what convinces us it is supposed to be Deborah. But judge here is just our crude English translation of the Hebrew word Moshiach, the deliverer, the savior, one who caused rescue to happen. The idea of a deliverer is someone chosen by God to gather people to an action that delivers them from what is ultimately oppressing them. With that in mind, I think we really only need like 5 or 6 verses in this story to see the pattern holds up. We are told in Judges 3 that because of Ehud, the land had its shalom for 80 years. 80 years. But alas, the cycle did begin again. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died. And this time we see there's two oppressions at the same time, one from without and one from within. Later on in the Song of Deborah, we learn, in the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, and in the days of Jael, the highways were abandoned, the travelers kept to the byways, the villagers ceased in Israel. They ceased to be until I arose. I, Deborah, arose as a mother in Israel. Jael will meet soon, but who is Shamgar? We get the essence of his story in just a single verse between Ehud and Deborah at the end of Judges 3. After him, Ehud, was Shamgar, the son of Anath, who killed 600 of the Philistines with an ox goad, and he also saved Israel. Believe it or not, there are several clues that historians notice from these two verses about Shamgar. Let me give us the basic picture. This cycle back into sin happens just as world history tells us the Bronze Age ends, when the kingdoms throughout the Mediterranean are invaded by a great migration of the mysterious sea peoples, most likely fleeing catastrophes elsewhere. One of these groups came to be known as the Philistines. They landed on the coast of Canaan and pushed back the tribes of Simeon and Judah from the coast to establish their kingdom in what is now called Gaza. Sound familiar? Their progress appears to have finally been stopped by Shamgar, an inland farmer and herder who got empowered to deliver the southern tribes. And let me take this moment to apologize if last time in Digging Deeper 299, I left you with the impression that the 12 judges perfectly represent the 12 non-priestly tribes. They do not. I showed a graphic from those who try to force it to work, but most scholars can agree that the 12 judges are meant to spiritually represent the 12 tribes. So, case in point, Shamgar. Because of his name, with his father's name, many historians believe, like Othniel, that he's half to 100% non-Hebrew. But in a Samson-like feat, the invaders seem to have finally been stopped by this one-man army with the equivalent of a cattle prod. This was better than any classic kung fu movie. And of course, we are then meant to also assume that Judah and Simeon at least rallied to his leadership to stop the thousands of Philistines from advancing and completing their own redemption cycle there in the south. That would also explain why in Deborah's song in chapter 5, they are not mentioned in her naughty or nice list of the tribes when responding to Barak's call to arms against the final internal threat of the Canaanites. And the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera. Then the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help. Does this sound familiar? For he had 900 chariots of iron, and he oppressed the people of Israel cruelly for 20 years. For movie fans, Sisera is the Darth Vader to Emperor Palpatine. He's the key to Israel's oppression. But who is key to Israel's redemption? Who was meant to be the Moshiach? Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at that time. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the people of Israel came to her for judgment, legal judge and voice of God for most of the tribes. And, we finally need to address the female elephant in the room. Yes, there are two very strong opinions in today's church about the spiritual leadership role of women. The complementarians, who believe men and women have equal worth before God, but have distinct complementary roles, with men called to spiritually lead based on gender. A woman should spiritually lead only after the man has failed to step up. And then there's the egalitarians, who believe that because of the equal worth before God, we can assume all spiritual leadership roles are open to both genders, meaning equality without restrictions based on gender. This is a healthy debate we are still having based on the Apostle Paul's letters to the New Testament church, but I don't think we can hash it out here in the book of Judges. I'm sorry. Both sides can look to the story of Deborah and Barak and interpret them through the lenses of their argument. For the egalitarians, even in this ancient patriarchal society based on physical abilities, gender was not important when Deborah had somehow proven over time that she could speak the word of the Lord and demonstrate the authority of the Lord, and that the Lord didn't seem to have considered her gender a factor either. So even in their sins, and even male leadership trusted her righteousness to decide their people's daily justice. But at the same time, complementarians, for most of all of the 20 years of oppression by the Canaanites, Deborah sat under her palm tree and did not deliver her people, as we understand a Moshiach judge is meant to do. The Lord never calls her to do that. Instead, he continues to call her to be his voice when a certain warrior leader sees and hears, but does not act when prompted within his own heart, like the 3 Moshiach judges before him were. She sent and summoned Barak, the son of Abinoam, from Kadesh Naphtali, and said to him, "Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you? Go, gather your men at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 from the people of Naphtali and the people of Zebulun, and I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the river Kishon, and his chariots and his troops, and I will give him into your hand. Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you?" The Hebrew word savah is throughout the Old Testament, but according to Strong's Concordance, the usage here is accusative. Hasn't God already spoken to you, Barak, and told you to do this? All of this exact battle plan from God himself. But you hesitate because you have doubts. You are supposed to be the Moshiach, the deliverer of your people. God has given you the ability. God has promised you the victory. But now I have to call you here as God's messenger and force you to respond, probably in public. Barak said to her, "If you will go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go." And she said, "I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman." Then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. So Barak was meant to be the deliverer after all. And the pattern of the descent of the judges themselves, well, it holds. But why his hesitation? Why did he doubt? If it was whether or not he's really heard God, well, that seems to go away when Deborah confronts Barak and recites every detail of God's top secret email back to him. But he still hesitates. The doubt is still in him until Deborah promises she'll go with him. Not because the general needs his hand held. It's because he's afraid of his own people. Afraid that they've been too oppressed, too beaten down for 20 years to rally to just him, a soldier. The best chance he thinks he has to assemble the men he needs from multiple tribes to go against 900 chariots built with the latest technology, iron, is to have the clearest sign to everyone that he, Barak, has heard the voice of the Lord, the God of their fathers, and he thinks, for everyone, the sign is Deborah walking beside him. But before she agrees to do exactly that, she scolds and prophesies once more. She scolds because Barak has not only worried about the math, but also the hearts of his men, not trusting that God had already been at work so that they would answer his call because their hearts had already been turning back to him, their Lord. Deborah knew she really wasn't necessary for this deliverance, but Barak didn't. With Deborah along, General Barak gathered thousands from 6 of the 12 tribes onto Mount Tabor. When General Sisera heard, he knew they were trapped if he surrounded the mount with his army and chariots in the valley below. But then something would happen, and Deborah would sing in Judges 5. From heaven the stars fought. From their courses they fought against Sisera. The torrent Kishon swept them away. The ancient torrent, the torrent Kishon, march on, my soul, with might. Barak's army charged down the mountain, utterly destroyed the enemy, whose armies were already attacked by something falling on them. And the chariots appear to have been literally stuck in the mud, so much so that Sisera got out of his chariot and ran off on foot alone because it was faster. He ran and ran until he reached what he thought was a friendly tent far away from the fight. It was the tent of Heber the Kenite. Kenites were a nomadic people known for their metalworking and also most likely been hired by the Canaanites before. But the Kenites were also a Midianite clan that had descended from the father-in-law of Moses, Jethro. They had separated from the rest of the Midians when they had joined Israel on their Exodus journey to the Promised Land. Heber the Kenite was not home, but his wife Jael was. She lulled Sisera into a false sense of security until he finally felt safe and was asleep, and then she suddenly hammered a metal tent stake through his skull into the ground. King Jabin was defeated and killed soon after as well. In the days of Shamgar, in the days of Jael, the heroes of this moment in history, Deborah, Barak, Jael, are said to be buried together on the site of Jael's victory. But I contend Deborah's prophecy of a woman's glory continues still to this day, because every time we open the book of Judges, we don't see Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Barak, Gideon, on and on. We think we see Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, which maybe is as it should be. If I want to be inspired by someone of such faith that she walked into a battle without a weapon, except the knowledge of what God could and would do through her flawed but open-hearted community, a community just waiting to hear the voice of the Lord. Thank you for joining us for this series. After our Easter break, we'll return with Kings, Prophets, and Priests. May God bless.